Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
We are so glad you're joining us for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start, I want you to just imagine standing in a secluded, freezing olive grove. It's the middle of the night.
Pitch black.
Right. The quiet is absolute. And then suddenly the darkness is just completely shattered. You've got hundreds of torches bleeding through the trees.
Like a terrifying amount of noise, too.
Oh, yeah. The rhythmic, heavy sound of armor and marching boots shaking the ground. A literal army has arrived in the dead of night to arrest one entirely unarmed man.
And the craziest part is what happens next.
Exactly. Because when that man simply speaks his own name, the psychological and moral force of his voice is so overwhelming that 1,000 heavily armed soldiers stagger backward and just collapse to the dirt.
It's wild. It completely redefines power and crisis and really human failure.
It really does. So for our deep dive today, we are looking at the Gospel of John, specifically chapters 18 through 21.
And we're analyzing this through the lens of two incredibly detailed historical commentaries. We've got Albert Barnes' notes on the whole Bible and Matthew Henry's complete commentary.
But we aren't just here to dissect first-century history, right? Our mission is to act as your guides, pulling the practical wisdom, the moral insight, and the profound life application out of this ancient text and placing it directly into your modern reality.
Because, honestly, the narrative arc we're exploring today is basically a masterclass in the extremes of the human condition.
Yeah, we are tracing a path from the claustrophobic terror of a midnight arrest straight into the absurd, spin-controlled political theater of a rigged trial.
Which is so relevant today. And from there, we are forced to look at the absolute agonizing crucible of a Roman crucifixion.
Then the disorienting shock of an empty tomb, and finally a quiet, restorative breakfast on the beach. We are digging for blueprints here.
Right, like when your life falls apart, when truth is manipulated, or, when you face unjust suffering, or completely fail your own moral standards, how do you respond? That is what we are after.
And the text just drops us right into it. It doesn't ease us in at all. It drops us right into the dark, literally and metaphorically.
The underlying question in the opening of chapter 18 is foundational. It's asking, how do you react when your world is suddenly violently upended by an unexpected threat?
And to answer that, the author sets up this brilliant contrast between two entirely different ways of handling a sudden crisis.
Yeah, and the physical setting of this crisis is just fascinating because it is deeply steeped in historical baggage.
Oh, absolutely. I was looking through Barnes' notes, and he makes a huge point about their location. Jesus and his disciples leave the upper room, and they cross the brook Kidron to enter this garden.
Right.
Now, to a modern listener, crossing a brook sounds like a nice, peaceful evening stroll.
It sounds lovely.
Right. But politically and historically, in first century Jerusalem, this specific piece of geography carries an immense amount of weight.
It carries massive weight. The topography of Jerusalem is it's essential here. So the Temple Mount is elevated, and to the east there is a steep, dramatic drop into the Kidron Valley before you ascend the Mount of Olives.
It's a serious height.
It is.
Oh.
And Barnes notes that the Greek word used for Kidron here is chimaron, which specifically denotes a winter stream.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a wadi that is dry in the summer but swollen, rushing, and really dangerous during the winter rains or melting snow.
So it's not a palm little creek?
Not at all. But beyond the physical danger, Matthew Henry points out the rich, symbolic history of this exact spot.
Right, the King David connection.
Exactly. Hundreds of years earlier, King David crossed this exact same rushing brook, weeping and barefoot, when he was fleeing a coup orchestrated by his own treacherous son, Absalom.
That is heavy. So the original readers would have immediately caught that echo.
They would have felt it in their bones.
Crossing the Kidron isn't just a geographical move for Jesus. It is the ultimate literary symbol for walking directly into betrayal and deep suffering.
Yeah, they're stepping into a garden, a place of cultivation and peace that is about to become an absolute war zone.
Because Judas arrives, and this is where I think, Sunday school stories do us a massive disservice.
Oh, completely.
I always pictured Judas showing up with a couple of grumpy temple guards holding, wooden clubs.
Right, a small little posse.
Yeah. But the reality of the text is absolutely terrifying.
It is a massive military mobilization. Henry's commentary points to the specific Greek word the author uses for the group Judas brings. The word is spira.
And that's not just a few guys.
No, this isn't a neighborhood watch. This translates to a Roman cohort.
Which is huge.
A full Roman cohort was typically a tenth of a legion, meaning anywhere from 500 to 1,000 highly trained, heavily armed Roman soldiers.
1,000 soldiers for one guy.
Plus, they are accompanied by the Jewish temple police. So you have a coalition of the most powerful secular military force in the world and the local religious enforcers all marching together.
Wait, I have to stop right there because logically that makes zero sense to me.
How so?
Jesus is a wandering rabbi. He has 12 followers, one of whom is leading the arrest, and maybe they have a handful of rusty swords among them. Why in the world would the Roman governor authorize 1,000 soldiers to arrest a pacifist teacher?
It seems like massive overkill, right?
It's an insane misallocation of military resources.
Well, it points to the sheer level of paranoia in Jerusalem at that specific time. It is the Passover. The population of Jerusalem would swell from perhaps 50,000 to over 1 million pilgrims.
So the city's packed.
Packed. And it was a powder keg of religious fervor and anti-Roman sentiment. The Romans were terrified of riots.
Oh, so they're on high alert.
Exactly. And the Jewish leaders had convinced them that Jesus was a potential insurrectionist, a kingmaker who could ignite a massive rebellion.
Okay, so they brought an army because they expected an army of zealots to defend him in the dark.
Yes. But there is also a profound, almost tragic irony in their preparation that Henry points out.
You mean the lanterns?
Yes. The text notes they come with weapons, lanterns, and torches. Matthew Henry highlights the absurdity of this.
It's so ironic.
Right. They are bringing artificial light to hunt down the man who has spent the last 3 years calling himself the light of the world.
Henry calls it the folly of lighting a candle to seek the sun. I love that.
It's brilliant. It visually demonstrates that this massive military machine has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the person they're coming for. They think they are hunting a rebel hiding in the bushes.
And their entire tactical plan just falls apart the second they arrive. Because instead of hiding or fleeing up the Mount of Olives, Jesus actively steps out of the shadows and walks directly toward 1,000 armed men.
He takes the initiative.
He does. He asks them, "Whom do you seek?" They answer, "Jesus of Nazareth." And his response is arguably one of the most intense psychological moments in ancient literature.
Oh, absolutely. He answers with 2 words in Greek, ego eimi.
Which translates to what, exactly?
Translates simply, it means I am he. But it is much deeper than a casual identification. This is the divine name.
Like from the Old Testament.
Yes, it is the exact phrasing used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush and says, I am that I am.
And the reaction from the soldiers is immediate. The text says they went backward and fell to the ground.
A whole cohort.
Right. Now, are we supposed to read this as a supernatural force field literally throwing them backward, or is it like a psychological collapse?
Well, the commentaries lean into the sheer, overwhelming moral majesty of the moment. Henry suggests it was a flash of divine authority that struck them down like thunder.
It was the weight of his presence.
Exactly. Imagine being a hardened Roman soldier, expecting a violent, chaotic skirmish with a desperate rebel. Instead, you are met with a figure of absolute, unshakable calm who speaks with a resonance and authority you have never encountered.
The cognitive dissonance alone would be staggering.
Right. Combined with the profound spiritual weight of that name, it physically rocks an entire cohort to the dirt.
Which brings us to the core tension of this crisis. Jesus actually has the upper hand here.
He does.
The army sent to arrest him is literally groveling in the dirt. If this were a movie, this is the moment he signals his followers, they step over the bodies, and they escape into the night.
Roll credits.
Right. But he doesn't use this leverage to save himself.
Yeah.
He uses it to negotiate the safety of his friends.
Yes.
He tells the soldiers, if therefore ye seek me, let these go their way.
It is a masterclass in the illusion of control. The Romans think they are in control because they have weapons, but Jesus is the one dictating the terms of the surrender.
He's running the negotiation.
Exactly. Barnes points out the profound prudence here. In the face of his own imminent torture, his immediate instinct is to build a protective boundary around his people.
He willingly submits himself to the arrest, but sets a non-negotiable condition for their safety. It's incredible leadership.
And right in the middle of this masterclass in calm, purposeful crisis management, we have Peter.
Oh, Peter.
Peter completely shatters the calm. He draws a sword, wildly swings it at the head of the high priest's servant, a man named Malchus, misses his head, and chops off his ear.
Just absolute chaos.
And Jesus immediately shuts Peter down, telling him to put the sword away.
Yes, and he heals the servant's ear, instantly undoing the damage Peter's panic just caused.
The text is setting up a stark contrast between divine purpose and human panic.
I am going to play defense attorney for Peter here because I think history judges him way too harshly in this moment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Put yourself in his sandals. Your best friend, the man you believe is the hope of your nation, is surrounded by a hostile, heavily armed mob in the dead of night.
Your adrenaline would be through the roof.
Right. Your adrenaline spikes. Fight or flight takes over the mammalian part of your brain. Swinging that sword isn't a moral failure. It is pure, unfiltered loyalty and survival instinct.
That's fair.
If someone breaks into my house tonight, I am not trying to have a philosophical debate. I am grabbing a baseball bat.
Your reaction is entirely natural, biologically and psychologically. But the text is arguing that the natural human response is actually inadequate for navigating true crisis.
How so?
Because Peter's sword swing doesn't solve the problem. It only escalates the danger. If Jesus hadn't intervened and healed Malchus, that single act of violence would have justified the Roman cohort slaughtering all the disciples on the spot.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Peter's panic almost got everyone killed.
Okay, that is a very fair point. Let's translate this into a modern, everyday reality for the listener.
Yeah, let's bring it into the present.
It is exactly like when someone in your office sends a devastating, highly accusatory email, and they CC your boss and the entire department.
Oh, the worst feeling.
Your career feels threatened. The modern Peter instinct is to immediately hit reply all and launch a scorched earth defense.
You want to fight back immediately.
You want to match their aggression. You want to verbally cut off their ear to prove you won't be intimidated. But the Jesus approach is recognizing that the immediate defensive strike usually just causes more collateral damage.
That is a highly accurate modern parallel. The scorched earth email feels deeply satisfying in the adrenaline of the moment, but it destroys your long-term strategy.
It really does.
Jesus tells Peter to put the sword away, and he gives a very specific reason. He says, "The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it?"
So it's about accepting his path.
Yes. Matthew Henry notes that this represents a settled, unshakable resolution. Jesus is distinguishing between yielding to victimhood and willingly submitting to a higher purpose.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. He isn't a passive victim of a Roman arrest. He is actively stepping into a role he has accepted.
That reframes the entire concept of surrender. We usually think of surrender as losing, but this text suggests that if you are deeply grounded in your purpose, surrendering a battle you don't need to fight is actually the ultimate power move.
Precisely. The practice for you, the listener, is found in the pause. When a crisis unexpectedly detonates in your life, your nervous system will demand that you draw your sword. You will want to lash out.
It's biological.
But the wisdom here is to insert a pause between the trigger and the reaction. Ask yourself, am I reacting out of fear, trying to protect my ego? Or am I responding out of my core values and my long-term purpose?
Because if you know your purpose, the panic loses its authority over you.
Exactly.
That is heavy. And the tragedy of the garden is that the physical threat is actually the easiest part to navigate.
Sadly, yes.
Because once the soldiers bind his hands and march him back across the Kidron Valley, we enter a completely different kind of battlefield.
The weapons change.
Yeah, they change from literal swords to words, optics, and spin. We step into the courtyards of the high priest, where the crisis shifts from physical survival to psychological endurance. Truth itself is put on trial.
This brings us to the anatomy of a moral downfall, specifically looking at Peter's denial. The text tracks Peter as he follows the arresting party from a distance.
Just lurking in the shadows.
Right. He manages to get into the courtyard of the high priest because another disciple, likely John, the author of this account, was known to the high priest and spoke to the girl keeping the door.
And this is where the psychology gets so incredibly relatable for us today. Peter gets inside hostile territory. It is the middle of the night, it is freezing cold, and the servants and officers of the court have made a fire of coals.
And what does Peter do?
He walks over and stands with the very people who just arrested his master just to warm his hands.
Matthew Henry's commentary offers a brilliant analysis of human nature here. He points out that our downfalls rarely happen in sudden, catastrophic leaps.
It's not usually one big cliff we fall off.
No, they're usually the result of a slow cascade of micro-compromises. Peter compromises his environment first. He chooses to mingle with a hostile crowd.
He just wants to blend in.
He wants the physical comfort of the fire, so he adapts his posture to blend in. Henry observes that we commonly study to approve ourselves to those with whom we choose to associate.
That is so true.
By warming himself at the enemy's fire, Peter is already subtly shifting his allegiance to avoid the friction of standing out.
He is trying to be invisible. And it completely backfires. He isn't cross-examined by a terrifying Roman interrogator or the high priest. The whole facade crumbles because of a casual observation from a low-status servant girl keeping the door.
She just asks a simple question.
Yeah, she just looks at him and says, "Are not thou also one of this man's disciples?" And Peter, the guy who was ready to take on a Roman cohort with a sword an hour ago, completely caves. He flatly denies it. "I am not."
It reveals the fragile nature of bravado. Physical courage in the heat of a chaotic garden is one thing. Moral courage in the slow, freezing tension of a hostile social environment is entirely different.
It's much harder to maintain.
It is. And once he tells the first lie, the trap springs shut. He has to maintain the lie. He is asked 2 more times, eventually by a relative of the man whose ear he cut off, and he denies it vehemently.
And then the rooster crows, fulfilling Jesus' exact prediction.
Exactly.
The psychological translation for us today is jarring. We like to think that if our core beliefs were put on trial, we would stand tall like heroes.
We all want to be the hero.
But the reality is we compromise in the small things first. We laugh at the joke that violates our values because we want to be liked at the office party. We stay silent when someone is gossiped about because we don't want to kill the mood.
We just want to fit in.
We warm our hands at fires that are actively burning away our integrity, and then we are shocked when we eventually deny our own identity.
That is the exact mechanism of compromise. And while Peter is failing his personal moral test in the courtyard, a massive systemic moral failure is happening inside the palace.
The legal trial.
Yes. Jesus is passed from the religious authorities to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And the hypocrisy the text highlights here is absolutely staggering.
Oh, this is the part that blows my mind. The Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, bring Jesus to the Roman praetorium to demand the death penalty because only the Romans had the legal authority to execute someone.
Right.
But they refused to actually walk inside the Roman building.
Yes. The praetorium was the official residence and headquarters of the Roman governor. Entering the home of a Gentile would render a Jewish person ceremonially unclean.
Meaning they would be disqualified from participating in the sacred Passover meal that evening?
Exactly. Both Barnes and Henry highlight the grotesque cognitive dissonance here. They are meticulously observing religious rituals to ensure they remain ceremonially pure, while simultaneously actively orchestrating the murder of an innocent man.
It's unbelievable.
As Henry puts it, they were straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel.
It is the ultimate historical example of valuing optics over ethics. They care more about the appearance of holiness than the actual practice of justice.
Which brings us to Pilate.
Right. And I am going to play devil's advocate for Pilate here, too. History paints him as this weak, vacillating coward. But I actually feel a bit of sympathy for the guy.
Really? Sympathy for Pilate?
Well, think about his position. He is a middle manager in the worst, most volatile posting in the entire Roman Empire. Judea is a nightmare to govern. If a riot breaks out during Passover, Emperor Tiberius will literally have his head.
Your assessment of Pilate's political reality is actually completely accurate. Historical records outside the biblical text show that Pilate had already deeply offended the Jewish population several times and had been reprimanded by Rome.
So he's basically on his last warning.
He is on incredibly thin ice. He is a politician whose sole directive from his boss in Rome is keep the peace, collect the taxes, and do not let the province burn down.
Exactly. So he interviews Jesus. He realizes immediately that Jesus is not a military threat to Rome. He explicitly goes back out to the mob and states, "I find in him no fault at all."
From a strictly legal standpoint, he issues a verdict of not guilty.
But the crowd is screaming. The religious leaders are threatening his political stability.
And inside the praetorium, Pilate and Jesus have this profound philosophical exchange about the nature of power. Pilate asks if he is a king.
And Jesus completely flips the script.
He completely redefines the concept of a kingdom. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight.
So he's telling the Roman governor that his authority doesn't rely on swords, territorial conquest, or political maneuvering.
It is built entirely on truth. Jesus states, "For this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth."
And Pilate delivers what might be the most cynical, devastating line in all of ancient literature: what is truth? But the tragedy isn't the question itself. It is what he does immediately after asking it. He doesn't wait for an answer. He asks the question, turns his back, and walks out the door to try and broker a political compromise.
Pilate is the ancient embodiment of post-truth pragmatism. When he asks, "What is truth?" he isn't being a sincere philosopher seeking enlightenment.
He's not looking for a deep debate.
No, he is a weary bureaucrat saying, "Truth is a luxury I cannot afford right now." He doesn't care about absolute truth. He cares about what works in the moment to maintain his own power and pacify a dangerous crowd.
So he offers a terrible compromise.
He offers to release either Jesus or Barabbas, a man who the text notes was a literal robber and an actual insurrectionist.
It is a desperate political maneuver. He thinks he can manipulate the crowd by offering them a choice so absurd they have to pick Jesus.
Right, he thinks it's a clever trick.
He thinks he can appease the mob while keeping his own hands legally clean. But you cannot negotiate with a mob. They scream for Barabbas.
The modern translation here is a brutal mirror for anyone in leadership, business, or even just navigating social dynamics.
It really hits close to home.
Pilate knows exactly what the ethical right choice is. But the pressure from the corporate culture, the crowd, or the bottom line is too high. So instead of standing on the truth, he tries to manage the optics.
He tries to thread a needle between his conscience and his career.
Exactly.
How often do we play the Pilate in our own lives? You know the right thing to do, but doing the right thing will cause a riot in your family, or get you canceled on social media, or stall your promotion at work.
So we trim the matter.
We soften our convictions, we try to appease all sides, we offer up our own little compromises, hoping the crowd will be satisfied.
The warning of the text is that compromise never satisfies a mob. It only emboldens them. When you value the crowd's approval over your own integrity, you eventually end up condemning the truth you know you should defend.
That is so powerful.
Pilate thought his political savvy made him the master of the situation, but his lack of grounding in actual truth made him a helpless pawn to the loudest voices in the room.
Which means his cowardly compromise doesn't just end with a political document being signed. The collapse of justice directly paves the way for sheer physical brutality.
We are moving into chapter 19 now, which is the absolute crucible of suffering.
Yeah.
The failure of both the religious court and the secular legal system culminates in the cross.
And the physical escalation is just horrific. Pilate, still desperately trying to avoid a full crucifixion, orders Jesus to be scourged.
And we need to understand what Roman scourging actually was. It was not a simple whipping. It was a brutal punishment designed to strip flesh from the body, often leaving victims near death.
It's agonizing just to think about.
Then the soldiers engage in psychological torture. They weave a crown of long, sharp thorns and force it onto his head. They drape him in a purple robe, mocking his claim to royalty, and strike him with their hands.
And Pilate brings him out to the balcony, bleeding, beaten to a pulp, wearing this mocking costume, and presents him to the crowd. He says, "Behold the man."
Yes.
What is Pilate's psychological angle here? Is he mocking the crowd or is he begging them?
Barnes' commentary suggests it was a calculated play for pity. Pilate hoped that presenting Jesus in such an utterly humiliated, pathetic state would satisfy the bloodlust of the religious leaders.
Like, isn't this enough?
He was essentially saying, look at him. He is broken. He is no threat to Rome, and he is no threat to you. Hasn't he suffered enough?
But the sight of blood just throws the crowd into a frenzy. The chief priests and officers immediately start screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!"
And Pilate finally caves entirely. He hands him over.
But Pilate gets one last petty bit of revenge against the Jewish leaders. He writes a title to be nailed to the cross above Jesus' head: Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.
And he writes it in 3 languages: Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. The religious leaders are furious. They demand he change it to say, he said, "I am King of the Jews." They don't want the claim validated.
But Pilate, finally finding a backbone only when it comes to being spiteful, refuses, saying, "What I have written, I have written."
Exactly.
Why do the commentaries make such a big deal out of the 3 languages, though? It seems like a minor administrative detail.
It is deeply symbolic. Barnes points out that while Pilate did it to mock the local leaders, historically and providentially, it broadcast a universal message. Those are the three primary languages of the known world.
How did they break down?
Hebrew was the language of religion and the ancient covenants. Greek was the language of philosophy, culture, and intellect. Latin was the language of law, empire, and military power.
Oh, wow.
By putting it in all three, the text implies that this moment on the cross is speaking to the religious, the philosophical, and the political spheres of all humanity.
I want to focus on the actual mechanics of what happens next because it completely redefines how we view suffering. We need to talk about what crucifixion actually does to the human body, because you don't typically die from blood loss on a cross, do you?
No, you don't. Crucifixion was engineered by the Romans to be the ultimate psychological deterrent. It was designed to maximize pain and delay death for as long as possible.
That's horrifying.
The primary cause of death was asphyxiation. With the arms stretched out and bearing the weight of the body, the chest cavity is pulled into a constant state of inhalation.
So you can breathe in, but you can't breathe out.
Exactly. To exhale, to breathe out, the victim has to push up on the nails driven through their feet, scraping their scourged back against the rough wood of the cross, just to gasp for a single breath.
And you'd have to do that over and over again.
It is a slow, agonizing suffocation that could last for days.
Which makes the detail the author includes next almost biologically impossible to comprehend. Jesus is suffocating. His body is in the ultimate state of trauma. The biological imperative in that moment is sheer animalistic survival.
It takes everything just to breathe.
Yet the text says he looks down from the cross, sees his mother Mary standing there, and sees the disciple John, and he expends the agonizing effort to push up on his pierced feet, grab a breath, and speak.
He says to his mother, "Woman, behold thy son," and to John, "Behold thy mother."
He is using his final tortured breaths to ensure that his aging mother has a home and a protector after he is gone. It is staggering.
It really is. Every wisdom tradition in human history grapples with the problem of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism's noble truths are built around navigating suffering. Stoicism teaches us how to mentally endure it.
But this is different.
It is. Here, the central figure is not just enduring suffering, he is actively prioritizing the needs of others while in the very epicenter of it.
I want you, the listener, to really sit with that. Think about your own behavior when you are in pain. And I don't even mean torture. If I have a bad migraine, or if I've just had a brutally stressful week at work, my entire world shrinks to the size of my own discomfort.
We all do that.
I snap at my family. I ignore text messages from friends who need help. My capacity for empathy completely evaporates because I am consumed by my own pain. I feel justified in being entirely self-absorbed.
Because you're hurting.
Right. Yet here, in the middle of a literal execution, the focus is outward.
It redefines greatness as service, maintaining that posture to the absolute bitter end. Shortly after this, knowing that the prophecies in his work are completed, Jesus says, "I thirst."
A very human moment.
This fulfills a specific ancient scripture, but it also underscores the brutal physical reality of his dehydration and hypovolemic shock. They offer him vinegar on a hyssop branch. He receives it, says, "It is finished," and bows his head, yielding up his spirit.
But the narrative doesn't stop at the moment of death. There's a bizarre, highly specific detail about what the soldiers do to the bodies to speed up the executions before the Sabbath begins.
Yes. The Jewish leaders ask Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken. If the legs are shattered, the victim can no longer push up to breathe, and asphyxiation happens in minutes.
So it's a way to finish it quickly.
The soldiers break the legs of the two men crucified on either side. But when they come to Jesus, they see he is already dead. So instead of breaking his legs, a soldier thrusts a spear into his side, and the text notes that blood and water immediately flow out.
Okay, we need to ELI 5 this. Explain. Like, I'm 5 because Matthew Henry's commentary goes deep into theology here. Why is the unbroken bone and the water and blood so critical to the author?
The unbroken bone is a direct historical tie to the Jewish Passover lamb. According to the ancient laws in Exodus, the lamb sacrificed to protect a family from death could not have any of its bones broken.
So the author is explicitly identifying Jesus as the ultimate Passover sacrifice.
Yes. As for the blood and water, Matthew Henry sees it as a profound metaphor for the dual spiritual needs of humanity.
Courtroom and hospital, right. Let's break that down.
Exactly. Henry associates the blood with justification and the water with sanctification. Let's use your analogy. Justification is the courtroom.
Okay, so you are guilty of a crime, but the judge bangs the gavel, declares your debt paid by someone else, and legally clears your record.
That is the payment for guilt. But walking out of the courtroom free doesn't fix the fact that you are deeply broken inside.
You still have the addiction or the anger or whatever.
Right. Sanctification is the hospital. It is the slow, ongoing, purifying process of actually healing the sickness in your soul and changing your behavior over time. That is represented by the water.
I see.
The text is claiming that the cross provides both legal pardon and internal healing.
The practical application of this intensely dark chapter is about how we process our own inevitable suffering. We are all going to face the crucible at some point. Disease, betrayal, loss.
It's part of being human.
This text forces a mirror in front of us. Will our suffering make us bitter, resentful, and entirely self-absorbed? Or can it be a crucible that actually expands our empathy for the pain of others?
The practice here is challenging but transformative. When you are going through a personal hardship, whether it is physical pain, emotional distress, or just a deeply frustrating day, intentionally choose to do one small act of care for someone else.
Like sending an encouraging text or helping a neighbor.
Listen to a friend's problem. Watch how forcing yourself to look outward, even momentarily, radically changes your relationship to your own pain. It breaks the gravitational pull of self-pity.
It rewires your brain. Okay, so the trauma of Friday has passed. The oppressive silence of Saturday is over. We are moving into chapter 20, which is the disorientation of Sunday morning.
A huge shift in tone.
This is about the darkness before the dawn and the gradual, confusing reveal of a completely new reality. How do humans process unimaginable, paradigm-shifting change?
The author begins with Mary Magdalene. The text says she goes to the tomb early while it was yet dark. It is Sunday morning. She is seeking Jesus, but let's be clear about her expectations.
She expects absolutely nothing but a decaying corpse.
She is bringing spices to complete the embalming process. She is driven entirely by grief and devotion to a dead man. But when she arrives, she finds the massive stone rolled away from the entrance.
She panics, assuming grave robbers have taken the body, and she runs to get Peter and John. They race to the tomb. John outruns Peter, but Peter, being his usual impulsive self, just charges straight inside.
And they find a detail that the commentaries say completely rules out the grave robber theory.
Oh, the grave clothes.
They find the linen grave clothes lying there, and the napkin that was around his head is not thrown aside, but neatly folded or wrapped together in a place by itself.
Which is such a weird detail to include unless it means something.
Henry points out the logic here. If thieves stole a body in the middle of the night, terrified of Roman guards, they wouldn't take the time to unwrap the corpse, leave the expensive linens behind, and carefully fold the face cloth.
They just grab and run.
It suggests a calm, deliberate awakening, not a chaotic heist. Peter and John see this, they believe something has happened, and they go back home.
But Mary stays. She is standing outside the tomb, utterly devastated, weeping. She finally looks inside and sees two angels sitting where the body had been.
And this is one of the most remarkable psychological details in the book.
She is so entirely consumed by her grief that seeing literal angels doesn't even startle her. They ask her why she is crying, and she just gives them a practical answer, because they have taken away my Lord.
Her grief has created a tunnel vision. She turns around and sees Jesus standing right behind her, but she doesn't recognize him. The text says she thought he was the gardener.
I have to push back on this. I mean, how do you not recognize your closest friend, your mentor, the person you have followed for years? He is standing right in front of her. Is he disguised? Does the resurrection change his physical appearance?
It's a great question. The commentaries suggest a mix of factors. It is still early, perhaps the lighting is poor, her eyes are filled with tears. But psychologically, she simply isn't looking for him.
She's locked in her expectations.
You don't see what you believe is impossible? She's looking for a corpse, not a living person. She even begs the gardener to tell her where he moved the body so she can carry it away herself, which shows the irrational strength of her devotion, a single weeping woman offering to carry a dead man's body.
And then the tunnel vision breaks. And it doesn't break because he gives her a theological lecture on resurrection physics. It breaks with a single word. He just says her name, Mary.
Just her name. The inflection, the tone, the familiarity of that single word shatters her grief. She instantly recognizes him and cries out, Rabboni, which means master.
The wisdom embedded here is that ultimate truth in this narrative is not presented as an abstract philosophical concept to be decoded. It is intensely personal. Truth calls you by name. It meets you exactly where you are in the middle of your specific blinding grief.
But then Jesus does something that has always felt incredibly harsh to me. She clearly lunges to embrace him, but he stops her. He says, touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father.
Why would he push her away in the most emotional reunion in history?
It does feel jarring. But Barnes explains that the Greek phrase implies, "Stop clinging to me." Mary, in her overwhelming joy, wanted to seize him and hold on, assuming that their relationship was going to resume exactly as it was before Friday.
She wanted to go back to normal.
She thought he was back to walk the dusty roads of Galilee with them forever. But Jesus is telling her that the paradigm has permanently shifted. The nature of their relationship must change. He is ascending to a new spiritual reality, and she cannot hold him back in the old physical one.
That makes profound psychological sense. It is the human tendency to try and freeze time. When we finally get a new opportunity, or when a relationship evolves after a period of conflict, our instinct is to desperately try and force it to look exactly like it did in the past.
We want what's comfortable.
We cling to the comfortable old version. Jesus is essentially telling Mary, do not cling to the old version of our relationship. We are moving to a higher, more expansive reality. You cannot embrace the new reality if your hands are tightly gripping the ghost of the past.
Exactly. And that theme, the intense human struggle to grasp a new, unseen reality, continues perfectly with Thomas. Later that evening, Jesus miraculously appears to the disciples in a locked room, offering them peace. But Thomas happens to be absent.
And when he gets back, he doesn't buy it.
When he comes back, the other disciples excitedly tell him they have seen the Lord, and Thomas flatly, aggressively refuses to believe them.
I am going to defend Thomas aggressively here. History has slacked him with the nickname Doubting Thomas, and it is used as an insult. But Thomas is the ultimate modern man. He demands empirical evidence.
He wants proof.
He says, "Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe." Think about the trauma he just survived. He watched his hope get tortured to death.
And his friends are acting crazy.
Now his friends, who are undoubtedly sleep-deprived, terrified, and emotionally compromised, are claiming a dead man walked through a wall, demanding peer-reviewed data, demanding physical proof before risking his heart again isn't a moral flaw. It is critical thinking. Why is he vilified for wanting evidence?
The beauty of the text is that Jesus actually does not vilify him. Jesus doesn't strike him with lightning for asking questions. He waits 8 days, appears again when Thomas is present, and meets Thomas exactly where his skepticism requires.
He offers the proof.
He offers his physical wounds for inspection. He says, "Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side." He gives Thomas the empirical data he demanded.
And Thomas's response is the highest declaration of who Jesus is in the entire gospel. He doesn't even need to touch the wounds. He just sees him and says, "My Lord and my God."
But Jesus follows it with a vital principle for every generation that will come after the first century. He says, "Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed."
So he's setting a new standard.
He is establishing that while Thomas's need for physical proof was accommodated, the ongoing normative experience for humanity will require trusting unseen realities based on the testimony of others and the conviction of the Spirit.
This translates directly into our modern anxiety. We all want to be Thomas. We demand absolute, ironclad proof before we make a move. We want to guarantee that the career pivot won't ruin our finances.
We want to guarantee that trusting a new partner won't result in heartbreak.
We want to touch the nail prints before we take a risk. But life rarely gives us the privilege of absolute empirical certainty before we have to choose a path.
The practical reflection for you, the listener, is to audit your own hesitations. Are you currently paralyzed, demanding absolute, impossible proof before taking a necessary step of faith in your life?
Because sometimes you just have to jump.
Where might you need to move forward based on the unseen evidence of your core values, your intuition, and your deepest convictions, even when you cannot see the guaranteed outcome?
We have to trust the unseen. Which leads us into the final chapter, chapter 21. This is all about restoration and the toxic trap of comparison.
It's such a relatable chapter.
The resurrection has established a completely new reality of victory over death. But there is a glaring, unresolved mess left behind. Peter's massive public moral failure in the courtyard. How does a shattered person get put back together?
The setting shifts from Jerusalem to the Sea of Galilee. The disciples have been told to wait there for Jesus. But waiting is agonizing for someone like Peter.
He's not a patient guy.
He is stuck in the limbo between his catastrophic failure and his unclear future. So what do humans do when they are stuck in the waiting room of life? They regress to what feels safe.
They go back to what they know.
Peter says, I go a-fishing.
Ah.
He goes back to his old career, the life he knew before Jesus called him. Several others follow him.
And it is a complete failure. They fish all night, grinding away at their old life, and they catch absolutely nothing. The futility is palpable.
As dawn breaks, a figure stands on the shore. They don't recognize him in the mist. He calls out, asking if they have any food. They answer no. He tells them to cast the net on the right side of the ship.
And then the miracle happens.
They do. And suddenly the net is so full of massive fish, they can't even haul it into the boat. John, who is highly intuitive, connects the dots to a similar miracle years earlier. He turns to Peter and says, "It is the Lord."
And Peter's reaction is incredible. He is a man of absolute extremes.
Yeah.
He doesn't help his friends row the heavy boat to shore. He throws on his outer garment, dives headfirst into the sea, and swims for the beach.
He just abandons the fish entirely.
He is desperate to get to Jesus, despite the fact that the last time they locked eyes, Peter was cursing and denying he even knew him.
When the rest of the disciples finally drag the boat to shore, they find a very specific scene waiting for them. Jesus already has a fire of coals burning with fish laid on it and bread. I want to highlight the sensory detail here.
A fire of coals? Wait, the olfactory memory?
Exactly. Smell is the sense most strongly tied to memory in the human brain, specifically linking the olfactory bulb to the amygdala where emotional memories are processed.
So he's triggering a specific memory.
Where was Peter the last time he stood around a fire of coals? He was in the courtyard of the high priest, smelling the charcoal smoke as he denied Jesus 3 times.
Oh, wow. Jesus has intentionally recreated the exact sensory environment of Peter's greatest trauma.
That is intense psychological therapy. He is bringing Peter back to the scene of the crime, not to punish him, but to rewire the memory.
After they eat, Jesus initiates the restoration. He looks at Peter and asks, "Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these?" He uses Peter's old name, Simon, reminding him of who he was before his calling.
And he asks this question 3 times. One public affirmation of love to counteract each of the 3 public denials.
The text says Peter was grieved by the 3rd time. It hurt.
It hurt because surgical healing hurts. Jesus isn't berating him or demanding an apology. He is allowing Peter to verbally rewrite his failure. He's extracting the poison.
And with each affirmation, Jesus gives Peter a new commission. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep.
I love that. He directly ties Peter's internal healing to external service. Your restoration isn't just about making you feel less guilty. It is about getting you back to work, caring for others. If you love me, take care of my people.
It is a brilliant practical path forward. But then, almost immediately after this beautiful, profound moment of restoration, Peter falls right into the most pathetic human trap imaginable.
He really does. Jesus shifts from Peter's past to Peter's future. He predicts that Peter will eventually die a martyr's death. He says, "When thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not."
So he's plainly telling Peter that his life of service will end in violent sacrifice.
Yes.
And what does Peter do? He just received forgiveness. He just got his life's mission. And he immediately turns around, sees John walking behind them, points at him and asks, "Lord, and what shall this man do?"
It is the ultimate facepalm moment.
He basically says, wait, what does his contract look like? Does John have to get crucified too? Is his path going to be easier than mine?
It is the trap of comparison, and it is as old as humanity. Jesus' response is sharp, definitive, and slightly rebuking. He says, "If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me."
Mind your own business.
Barnes points out that Jesus is shutting down a vain, useless curiosity. Henry notes the core wisdom. Our great concern is our own duty, not the events of another person's life. Jesus tells Peter, your path is your path. John's path is John's path.
It is exactly what we do when we mindlessly scroll through social media, benchmarking our own difficult, messy struggles against someone else's carefully curated highlight reel. We get paralyzed by comparison.
It's so toxic.
We cannot fulfill our unique purpose if we are obsessively calculating whether our peers have an easier journey, a bigger house, or a faster promotion. It drains our energy and breeds massive resentment.
The practical application for you is a mental reset mechanism. Whenever you catch yourself looking at someone else's success with envy or comparing your difficult path to their seemingly easy one, you need to interrupt that thought pattern.
What's the phrase?
Use this ancient phrase. Tell yourself, what is that to me? I must follow my own path. It cuts off the toxic comparison at the root.
It is incredibly freeing to realize you only have to run your own race. Just stay in your lane, do the work you've been given to do, and let go of everyone else's trajectory.
As we conclude this deep dive, there is one final provocative thought from the very last verse of John's Gospel. The author writes, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written."
It is obvious hyperbole, but the underlying point is deeply profound.
He is saying the story isn't finished.
Precisely. The wisdom didn't end when the ink dried on the page. It isn't locked in the first century. The text suggests that it continues to unfold in the lives of those who read it, internalize it, and live it out.
You, listening right now, are the unwritten books. You're the ones carrying this ancient blueprint into the modern world.
What a way to end. We've covered massive ground today. We have seen how true power absorbs panic, how compromise slowly burns away integrity, how suffering can expand empathy, and how failure is never the final word if we are willing to sit by the fire and be restored. That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.